Hi there guys, I hope you are having a good day. Now, Derek Chisora was asked about Kubrat Pulev versus Anthony Joshua because Derek Chisora has been in the ring with Pulev. So he was asked about how Anthony Joshua should approach dealing with Kubrat Pulev and is he better than many are giving Kubrat Pulev credit for? And he said simply yes. He is a lot better than many people believe, and he said that Anthony Joshua needs to approach this fight very differently to the Andy Ruiz Jr. rematch. Obviously he would, because it's a completely different opponent. Ruiz was small and fast. You need to keep him on the outside because he's an inside fighter. Kubrat Pulev is not an inside fighter. He's a long-range boxer with ultimately throwing power shots similar to Anthony Joshua. So the game plan will be different, set out for Anthony Joshua versus Kubrat Pulev as opposed to Anthony Joshua versus Andy Ruiz Jr. Now, Derek Chisora explained that Kubrat Pulev has quite an amateurish style, bouncy, throwing that jab, pawing with it as well. And that is what Kubrat Pulev does. Derek Chisora knows him as good as anyone because he's been in the ring with him, spent 12 rounds in there as well. And that was a difficult 12 rounds because Kubrat Pulev did do a good job at controlling Derek Chisora. And we have seen how difficult that can be in fights where he's been in there with Dillian Whyte, who is considered maybe number 3 in the world, or was before his loss to Povetkin. So ultimately you can see someone who is so highly ranked as Dillian Whyte still struggling to control and work with Derek Chisora. And I mean, Kubrat Pulev did have a very convincing victory over Derek Chisora. Now, what Derek Chisora has explained Anthony Joshua needs to do in this fight in order to beat Kubrat Pulev is to look at his first 10 pro fights, the explosiveness of those fights, and how he just stepped on his opponents and took them apart. That's what he needs to do against Kubrat Pulev. Derek Chisora explained that it will be quite a simple night for AJ if he does that. If he does not do that and he tries to box Pulev instead, then it could be a very tough night for Anthony Joshua because Kubrat Pulev does have that very amateurish style where he's pawing with the jab, he's jabbing constantly, he's bouncy, he moves as well. But the one thing with Kubrat Pulev now is he is not the same fighter he was when he fought Derek Chisora. He's a bit older now, but maybe that comes with a little bit more experience because in his first world title fight and his only world title fight, he did come apart mentally and physically in some way because ultimately in there with Vladimir Klitschko, the levels did show. The levels of experience more than anything. Because what happened was Kubrat Pulev got hurt early and ultimately he didn't do anything right in order to stay in there. He was standing there in the center of the ring. His feet were basically square and he was almost trading with Vladimir Klitschko, which is something you should never do when you are in there with a power puncher and you have been hurt, especially considering Kubrat Pulev at the time wasn't really considered a big puncher, but more of a boxer. And in that fight, after Kubrat Pulev had been hurt, he just got peppered with left hook after left hook. And as I said, there was nothing he'd done about it. There was nothing he'd done to thwart Vladimir Klitschko's success. Now, what a lot of people done against Vladimir Klitschko was went in there to try and knock him out because he had those 3 knockout losses early in his career. So he had this stigma of vulnerability, but many could not exploit that because of Vladimir Klitschko's game plan and how he fine-tuned his boxing style over the years after those losses under Emmanuel Stewart, because you have that long jab, the leaning back, and that safety-first approach from Vladimir Klitschko. So many fighters would go in there trying to knock him out because there were vulnerabilities there early on in his career that were not apparent later on in his career. So what Pulev was doing was almost just trading up with Vladimir Klitschko, rolling the dice when he did not need to. If he would have boxed Vladimir Klitschko, then he would have given him a lot tougher night than he did. That's what Tyson Fury done. Tyson Fury did not go in there trying to knock out Vladimir Klitschko. He went in there to outbox him because, I mean, Vladimir Klitschko at that stage was someone who was safety first, as I said. Good jab, leaning back. Very hard to catch clean, even though he is kind of a static target and doesn't move his head all that much, but he's so strong on the inside. When they get close, he just ties them up. And often he was the bigger man in the fight. If he wasn't, he was using that footwork positioning to get out of range. So ultimately Klitschko had mastered how to not get knocked out by his opponent. So what Tyson Fury done was not try and knock him out. Don't walk onto punches. He outboxed Klitschko instead. And ironically, the same thing applied to Deontay Wilder, but the other way around. Many fighters would go in there and outbox him because they can outbox him. Anyone can. But they would get caught eventually. Whereas Tyson Fury, instead of going in there to try and box him in the second fight, he went in there to knock him out. So you can see how important the game plan is, because, I mean, you have someone like Deontay Wilder who is extremely powerful and eventually always finds that punch. Even against Tyson Fury in the first fight, found it twice. So you have someone like that who is extremely devastating when they land their punches, and they always do. Look at his track record, he always does land that punch that gets him out of jail. So what do? You get to him before he lands that punch. So you can see in both instances, Tyson Fury got his game plan perfectly right. Against Klitschko, many fighters would go in there and try and knock him out because they believed that there were vulnerabilities there for them to exploit. And Tyson Fury went in there, outboxed him, beat him that way. Deontay Wilder, many fighters would go in there and box with him because they believe that they cannot fight with him because he has the more power. So they'll try and outbox him because they know they can. But Tyson Fury comes along, he doesn't try and outbox him. Well, he did in the first one, but he saw something in the 12th round. Step to him, he cannot deal with that. So he went in there with a fighter who is extremely easy to outbox, but not so easy to fight maybe, but he still fought him and knocked him out. And going back to Vladimir Klitschko versus Kubrat Pulev, you can see that Pulev had the wrong game plan. He'd done all of the wrong things when he was hurt in that fight. He went in there maybe thinking he could knock Vladimir Klitschko out, but had he boxed Klitschko, then it would have been a lot easier for him to stay in there longer and maybe have an opportunity to win the fight, as opposed to getting hurt and trading with your opponent who has an extremely high knockout ratio. So that Klitschko fight represents the only fight that Kubrat Pulev has lost, and it represents also the inexperience of Kubrat Pulev. When he was hurt, he was doing all of the wrong things. Similar to Anthony Joshua versus Andy Ruiz Jr. in the first fight. AJ was doing all of the wrong things, fighting when he should have been holding, because he could have done that. But ultimately AJ learned from that, and I believe that Kubrat Pulev has also learned from his experience in there with Vladimir Klitschko. So Anthony Joshua, I mean, many people say that he has a vulnerability, and they say that was exploited by Andy Ruiz Jr. So Pulev is in a similar situation to when he fought Vladimir Klitschko. He's in there with a fighter who maybe many believe can be stopped, can be hurt, but does he go in there and try and stop Anthony Joshua like he says he's going to do? Or does he go in there and box with Anthony Joshua like he should have done when he fought Vladimir Klitschko? So both Anthony Joshua and Kubrat Pulev have had the same lessons they had to learn through their losses. Anthony Joshua through the Andy Ruiz Jr. fight, and Kubrat Pulev through the Vladimir Klitschko fight. Now you hear many things from like Bob Arum, who says that Kubrat Pulev is a better fighter than Andy Ruiz Jr. and therefore will beat Anthony Joshua more conclusively. But when you look at the two fighters, if you put them side by side, Andy Ruiz Jr. and Kubrat Pulev, completely different fighters, completely different aesthetically too, but that's not what's important. What is important is Kubrat Pulev is 6'4", 6'5". Ruiz is 6'1" or 6'2". Ruiz weighed in 20 stone in the second fight, 19 stone in the first one. Pulev is closer to 240, 245, which is around 17 stone. So he's lighter, taller, and has a better jab than Andy Ruiz Jr. Ruiz, he has a jab, but not in the same way Kubrat Pulev does. Kubrat Pulev, as Derek Chisora has explained, has that amateurish style, pause with the jab, whereas Andy Ruiz Jr. will only throw a jab to try and get on the inside. That's all he needs to do. That's what Andy Ruiz Jr. is trying to do in there with every fighter he is in there with. Try and get on the inside, try and get them to trade with him, because he has the durability to go rounds constantly getting hit and dishing out his own punishment. Andy Ruiz can take a punch from Anthony Joshua, many of them, he has proven that. So Ruiz has a granite chin. He's extremely fast and more powerful than many give him credit for. So Ruiz needs to get on the inside. Kubrat Pulev needs to box on the outside. So two completely different fighters with different skill sets. So for Bob Arum and many others of Team Pulev to say that Anthony Joshua cannot deal with Pulev because he could not deal with Ruiz in the first fight, they're two different styles, and therefore Anthony Joshua struggles with smaller fighters who are fast and get on the inside. He does not struggle so much with taller fighters who he can keep at range. And that is what Kubrat Pulev is going to want to do in there with Anthony Joshua. He's not going to want to trade on the inside because Pulev is not a good inside fighter. He would rather hold on the inside and get reset by the referee and go back to long range boxing. Anytime he does rush in, he falls over his front foot anyway. So that's very dangerous when you could consider a counter coming from Anthony Joshua. So Pulev won't want to fight on the inside. He'll want to box on the outside. So therefore, he cannot cause Anthony Joshua the same problems as Andy Ruiz Jr. But he can cause his own set of problems to Anthony Joshua. Like Derek Chisora explained, he has a very awkward style. Chisora said that Anthony Joshua needs to be explosive. Double up that jab, come around to the side, bring in the right hand. Start early, start as you mean to go on in round 1. And that probably suits Anthony Joshua in this fight. Get that double jab out there, then he won't see the right hand coming. But ultimately, he doesn't want to be throwing that right hand too soon. So get the jab going and probably win the first round. Then start setting up those right hands when Kubrat Pulev starts to get eager to land. Also, there is the possibility that Anthony Joshua can go to the body of Kubrat Pulev, because often what Kubrat Pulev does is when he is caught with shots upstairs is he lifts his gloves and elbows too high, leaving his body open, meaning Anthony Joshua can work downstairs as well, then bring the punches upstairs. And Anthony Joshua is the fresher of the two, so ultimately he will be better going late into the fight, especially if he is in control. Anthony Joshua does have also this stigma attached to him, that he gets tired. Anthony Joshua does not get tired when he is in control of the distance and the tempo of the fight, so it is vital he captures control of those things early on in the fight, so that if this fight does go later on, he is in control and therefore won't get tired and burn nervous energy. So AJ can do the rounds as long as he controls all of those things, which he will do with Pulev if he starts fast with that double jab, like Derek Chisora explained, and forces Kubrat Pulev out of his comfort zone, boxes him when he wants to fight, fights him when he wants to box. That is very important in there at this level. And it is the belief of Derek Chisora that Anthony Joshua needs to go back to basics for this fight with Kubrat Pulev. Guys, anyway, what are your thoughts on this? Make sure you leave your thoughts in the comments below, leave a thumbs up and subscribe if you are new. Thanks guys.